Hi, everybody. Darin Lynch, founder and CEO of Irish Titan, here for part 2 of our Headless Commerce series with Ultra Commerce. My co-conspirator here, Brad Gustavson. Brad, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Darin. Yep, I'm Brad Gustavson. I'm the CMO at Ultra Commerce, and we are an all-in-one complete e-commerce platform, and work with a number of great partners like you guys, like Irish Titan, and we deliver our commerce platform as a software as a service model. And one of our key selling points is that we're a headless commerce platform. We're all in. So love chatting and love the opportunity to chat with you today about Headless.
Cool. I really enjoyed our first conversation. I'm looking forward to this one. And one of the things I think maybe in our emails where we started to riff around on this is, this is a trilogy with part 1, part 2, and part 3.
Right.
And as a big Batman fan, I'm excited because that would make this Dark Knight, which is my favorite, not just favorite superhero movie, but probably my second favorite movie of all time. So this one has to be good, right? The second part of a trilogy is always the best.
That's right.
Dark Knight, yeah. Empire Strikes Back.
That's right. And we can think about all kinds of other movie trilogies as well where the second one was just as good or sometimes better, right?
Right.
My first thought, of course, was thinking about the Godfather series. So
Yep.
The second one was great as well. So there you
Raiders of the Lost Ark, the second one. Yep.
Absolutely.
And I guess we're dating ourselves, right? Because some of our listeners might be thinking of, I don't know, Harry Potter, but that was more than a trilogy. But, I think we're dating ourselves. But that's okay. Those are timeless classics we just referenced.
Exactly. Stand the test of time.
Right. Okay, so the first conversation we had, we really covered the high levels of Headless, what it means, what shapes it takes, industries, various solutions at a high level, right? Because headless commerce is one of those terms and phrases that's been used in conferences that we've been going to for a long time, but it's started to become more mainstream and actually become tangible, even though it does mean different things to different people and it can take different shapes. It is real now, and ultra commerce is proof of that, right? So I think that in this conversation, we want to move on to a little bit more technical, tangible, substantive discussion around Headless, the nuts and bolts of it, how it works. Because I think that's a natural migration in conversation here. So let's start there. And Brad, from a platform overview perspective, what do you think of when you think of Headless?
Yeah, and I think the question that we get, I think most often, when we're sort of introducing the concept and talking through with, potential customers is, where's that sort of handoff? What does that look like? And really what it comes down to is when you start thinking about the build and that storefront is, which system, and let's assume we're using a content management system to do the front end, whether it's one of the sort of old school, the WordPress, or maybe it's Drupal, or it's one of the headless CMS options out there like Contentful. Is what does that flow kind of look like? I'm a user, I land on a product page, how does that structure sort of set up? And what we always sort of say is, well, your content is coming from your CMS or whatever sort of content repository you have. And maybe the CMS is controlling the design and the UI, but all of your commerce data and the functionality of it, that's where your headless commerce platform comes in. So any data that you want, and you think about product, category, brand, all of that first and foremost, but then all the sort of functionality. So the minute you start hitting, the add to cart button, right, or you're upping the quantity or applying a promo code or any of those cases, that's where you're making those calls out to those to the commerce platform to do something, and that's really the handoff between the two in the sort of the simplest form, is sort of the way we describe it. The minute you're asking for anything that's sort of commerce related, go to the commerce platform. The minute you want anything content related. And what it comes down to from a build standpoint is how do you want to manage that build process? And that's where folks like you guys come in, sitting down with a client to say, here's our layout, and here's where these different things are going to come from, and that's sort of the decision making process that you'll run through with your clients, right, and how that build works.
Right, and I think that to level set, and perhaps I should have led with this, so shame on me if it's helpful. But we've talked about how headless means different things to different people. I think a good definition of it that does make sense and holds water is headless commerce is the separation of your shopping cart from the rest of your shopping experience, right? Because the rest of that shopping experience is many things, but in general, that's where all your content lies. Your brand content, your thought leadership content, your product detail pages, category pages, etc. Now, those last two that I mentioned, the category pages and product detail pages, start to be, if there's a Venn diagram, that's in the middle, right? Is that in Contentful, for example, or is that in Ultra Commerce? Is it part of the actual shopping cart e-commerce platform, or is it part of the content platform? And that's what we work through with our merchants. But then once you start to get into the cart, that's where the platform comes in, right? And so I think that describing it like that, on top of how you answered that question and walked us through that, begs the question of integrations, right? Because I think in the old days, which weren't all that long ago really, but feel like it in the industry, in the old days, there were monolithic e-commerce platforms, right? If you had an e-commerce store, you had a platform that literally everything lived within that, right? Well, now with Headless, you can start to separate lots of things, not just your shopping cart from your experience, but you can have an ERP system and a point of sale system and a shopping cart and a content platform. And so talk to me a little bit about some of your philosophy and point of views around the integrations around Headless.
Yeah. And that really, comes down to, a really key point. And I think in a lot of conversations that you have, the integrations piece gets sort of lost, right? Yes. Quite a bit, right? A lot of times it's by choosing, because it's sort of like this ERP, I don't really know about that, or it's overlooked just because it's all happening under the covers, right? It's not something visual, it's not something you can kind of see, and it gets forgotten about. I mean, it's sort of one of those things at the end, like, oh yeah, we need to do that. So what we've seen quite a bit, right? It's just how important the API is, that, access to the entire platform, because chances are there's going to be something in there. But also that the API needs to handle the complexity or the customizations that get added in. So like in the case you mentioned, with if you're linking, let's say, commerce into a blog post, maybe all you're doing is displaying products, right? Not a big deal. Really heavy content, lightweight on the commerce side of things, but on a category page, much more so. There's a lot more commerce going on. There's a little bit of content. You kind of make the link together. So how do you take maybe a commerce heavy page or layout and pull in content in a way that you sort of want, and that level of flexibility? And on the integration side, from the sort of the back office, it's all about, how can you sit down and map out, what are those key workflows? What are those data points that you need to push off to that third-party system? Maybe it's an ERP, inventory. Maybe you've got a PIM. You're managing your product data. You're doing order management. There's other systems that you might want to link in, or maybe some legacy systems that you have to link in that you don't want to into the e-commerce mix. So it gets, the content side is sort of one aspect to that integration puzzle, but it's a huge exercise, right, to go through that.
I think that you and I have both been in the industry for a long time, grizzled veterans, right? And I think in the old days, integrations really were an incredible obstacle to a successful project. Yep. And some of that's because the e-commerce platforms of yesteryear didn't have some of the APIs. Well, they didn't have the APIs that we have now. But not only that, but the ERPs themselves, just to choose one of the common integration points, the ERPs themselves were so much more archaic, right? Because integration by definition is you're connecting two different systems. So if you were to have for Ultra Commerce, for example, but have a dated, antiquated ERP, you're still going to struggle with the integration point because your ERP is limited. I think that today, in the environment that we find ourselves today, integration is a lot easier. It's still really substantial and very tricky. It's very complex. But now, like I consider Ultra Commerce an e-commerce 3.0 platform because it's API first, right?
Right.
Like you're built for that. And
Right.
nearly every merchant of size and sophistication now has an ERP that is updated, upgraded, and
Right.
has strong API capabilities. So
Yep.
integrations themselves are really complex, but so much more achievable than they used to be.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so
It really, what it comes down to is you sort of sit down, and if your ERP is, a little bit more modern, right? Not one of those much more legacy systems, but if they have an API and your commerce engine has an API, you really, what you need to do is sort of, figure out, well, what data do we want to push back and forth, and when, how often, which system owns what,
right.
and
Whereas
then
the one version of truth.
exactly right. Like, okay, well, the commerce system owns this, but this is coming from here, and you kind of map it together. And okay, we want to update it, once a day. And what does that sync look like, or do it in real time? And then in a lot of cases, you just need to kind of review like what the sort of documentation, and hopefully there is some on the ERP side to map those things together in as best in as best a way as you can. And if you need to, you can also the development team, the tech team, can do that translation layer in between. So if something's coming over and needs to be edited or modified before it gets to the ERP, you can, like, that level of flexibility is there to do those sorts of things, to your point, to make it easier, to get two systems to talk together that might not be otherwise. And a lot of what we see as well is there's that expectation now. I think that's a big part of it on the ERP side, and as well as other services, that they expect that data is going to be coming in from other systems, whereas before it was sort of like there's a wall around it. Yeah, no, we really don't want you to. We don't think you're going to. It's all here. If you really want to get data out, okay, we'll export a CSV or something and go put it someplace else, right? We'll do that once a week. But now, like, the expectation is changed, that systems expect that.
Right.
They have the tooling available, and when you combine that together, it's a lot more flexibility and agility for development.
Right. Right. So as we near conclusion of part 2 of this trilogy, let's look at it from a merchant's perspective. So what does a successful headless site mean for a merchant? And sort of the flip side of that, where do breakdowns happen? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I think the biggest, sort of where Headless got started was what really got some momentum, was the idea that there was sort of this pendulum, right, of platforms that were really developer friendly, open source. You needed a dev team to go in there and build it and pick a theme, and then it kind of swung to more sort of self-service that marketing could love, because you could go in and sort of add extensions and all that.
Yep.
And build from there. And really what you want to be is that space in the middle, where you're developer friendly, developers are happy, they have access to what they want, they have an API and an SDK and all that kind of stuff. But then the marketing team and the design team can go in and say, well, yeah, that's cool, I get what you guys like, but I want a full feature set for promotions and
Right.
reporting and analytics and all that cool stuff in the back end. And on the front end, I want to be able to lay out that level of flexibility from a design and template standpoint. So where the opportunity lies is to find that middle ground. And I think there's certainly a sense for both teams to kind of work together, rather than coming at loggerheads when it comes to the platform process. But a lot of it just I think comes down to and hopefully you see this too, that the projects that are really successful work well when a team can sit down and really build out the requirements that they're really looking for, and identify the right problem that's kind of holding them back. And then I think it's for larger companies as well, it's the opportunity to go in, and that Headless gives you, of saying, well, we don't have to completely re-platform everything. If we're happy with our CMS, let's figure out a way to connect commerce into it. On the ERP side, we can keep our ERP and connect commerce to it. And that's a kind of a new way of thinking that hasn't quite completely sunk in yet, that capability.
Yeah, I think you have a good theme in there, because again, in the old days, so to speak, not to sound like get off my lawn, but it's when they had the monolithic e-commerce platforms, and those were really technically powerful, very dev intensive, not as marketing content friendly, right?
Right.
And sometimes I sort of understand whether that was by accident or by design, because in those implementations and those projects, you ended up having to use so much of your budget to launch that you had less budget preserved to allocate towards acquisition, conversion, retention strategies, marketing strategies.
Yep.
Then e-commerce 2.0 came along with these marketing-friendly e-commerce platforms, but then they were sort of limited from a technical perspective. You couldn't integrate as well, couldn't do as many high-powered, maybe custom things. And now we're in these e-commerce 3.0 times, ultra commerce, and you sort of do have a blue ocean in front of you from a marketing perspective and a technical perspective. So I think the successful projects are the ones that maybe capture all of those requirements, those blue oceans, marketing and technical, and then prioritize them in a way that best furthers the business. One of our phrases here, we've actually trademarked it, it's our why using Simon Sinek speak, is business first, online second. I think Headless is kind of the best of that, because it lets you identify and prioritize your marketing priorities, your content priorities, thought leadership, lifestyle content, et cetera, while also prioritizing your technical requirements, integration, et cetera, because really, to oversimplify, all of that's available. You can't do all of it, and that's where breakdowns happen when someone tries to do all of it. So I think that's how I would say back to you the same thing you said to me.
Yeah, and figuring out, like, I think you nailed it. Figuring out what's important, figuring out what the priorities are, is that critical thing, right? And it's hard to do, because you know, someone sits down and says it's all important, I got to do it all. Well, yeah, you do, right? Of course, right. But you also don't want to compromise and let's say lose. You know, if you've got a great blog and great content, and you lose that because you know you had to make something available for your dev team. Yeah, right. Is that really the game you want to be playing? And you shouldn't. It shouldn't be win lose. At the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. Not every priority is a priority.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Brad, thanks for another great conversation.
Yeah,
I look forward to wrapping this up with the Dark Knight Rises version of our trilogy. Underrated movie, by the way. But we'll be back for more. So on behalf of Brad, thanks again for tuning in. Darin Lynch from Irish Titan here, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Sláinte.